What's up, everybody? Welcome back to I Came With Fire podcast. Tonight, it's just Zach and I going at it together, just the dynamic duo. Had a change of plans. We were supposed to have Hazard Lee, fighter pilot, on today, but had to change those up. I don't want to put his business out there, but congratulations to him. So,
Yes,
as always,
certainly.
this podcast is sponsored by Red Clover Coffee. Red Clover Coffee is a veteran-owned business. They donate to a lot of awesome charities. And if you head over to their website or their Instagram page, you can use our promo code CAMEWITHFIRE for 10% off your purchase at checkout. And we got a new sponsor, Sheep's Clothing LLC. Announced that on our Instagram, which of course went over to Facebook as well. If you follow us there, we don't have our discount code yet, but as soon as we do, it will be put up on our social media so you guys know you can go over there and get your merch for 10% off as well. So shout out to both Red Clover Coffee and Sheep's Clothing LLC for sponsorship. We truly appreciate it. So please head over and support our sponsors because they support us and in turn help keep the podcast going. How you doing, Zach?
I'm doing good. I'm doing great. That sheep clothing sponsor is actually pretty nice because I like to collect a lot of different sweatshirts. I'm wearing one right now.
Yeah.
Not from them, but just a random sweatshirt. What's funny is I always remove the little drawstrings. I find them so annoying. So
Yeah.
like these ones here, they're just gone. I don't like them.
Oh, dude, yeah, I never leave the drawstrings in at all. I do too.
Nope.
Like, especially after having kids, and I get my son, I'm holding him, and he'll just like start yanking on them. So, yeah.
I feel like I'll be like eating, and it's like getting in my food, or I'm doing something. They're always in the way, so I'm like,
Mm.
see ya.
Well, I also don't ever like yank on the strings to like tighten the hood
Exactly.
around my head. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm not trying to look like Kenny from South Park, I guess.
Yeah. I've never needed a reason to do that. It makes no
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah. No, for sure. But so
But
yeah, like I
I
said
was gonna,
tonight. No, go ahead, man.
I was gonna kind of segue. I was gonna speak into it. Speaking of strings, kind of just being pulled out and going missing. Today's
Mm,
episode is gonna deal with a lot of missing things, missing
that's
people.
true.
We're hitting into the missing 411 kind of cases, which
Yeah.
are made famous by David Paulides. And we're going
Yep.
to kind of talk about a couple of those. I didn't know anything about this until a couple months ago when you started telling me about it.
Right.
And much like everything else we've kind of discussed, it led me down a rabbit hole and it just left me with more questions. So I'm excited for this one.
They definitely have. The 401 cases is something that I've looked into for a couple years. I've listened to a bunch of different other podcasts that have done 411 episodes. Astonishing Legends has done them. Bedtime Stories podcast has done them, and a few others. I couldn't really think of them off the top of my head, but I think one of the things that's the most creepy about the missing 411 is that they're not paranormal, right? I mean, there's some
Hmm.
speculation that they are paranormal, and we'll get into a bunch of different reasons, or things why they could be happening. But a lot of them involve people that just disappear and are never seen from again. Some of their remains are found again, some of them are not found again, and then there have been even people who have had experiences similar to those that they describe around those who have disappeared, but they haven't disappeared. And so
Hmm.
maybe they almost got caught up in a situation like that. But yeah, man, as you said, the missing 411 is something that is a project originally from David Paulides, who used to be a police officer. And for those of you guys that don't know, I feel like this is actually a pretty common thing. If you get talking to people who listen to podcasts, or if you have an interest in the weird. But I'll say this: the past couple of days, I've talked to a few people about what we were going to talk about, and literally no one knows about it. And the only other person
Mm.
that knows about it is my wife, and she only knows about it because of me. And you too, right? So,
Yeah.
but anyway, so what happened essentially is that a National Park Service ranger approached David and essentially told him that he felt like there was a cover up of missing people in the national parks in North America. And this has
Hmm.
kind of turned into a project now. It's called the CANAM Project, the Canadian and American Project. And this all centers around disappearances in national parks, both in the United States and Canada. And that's where he focuses his the bulk of his research is in these two places, right? So there are people that go missing in other parks around the world, I'm sure, but this focus is specifically in North America. But Zach and I both have a couple of cases tonight that we're going to talk about. Then one thing about David that I really like is that he doesn't ever ascribe to one explanation or another, and he leaves it very open. And that's because
Hmm.
there's no way of knowing what's actually going on. And also, there's just adding that speculation to it, which we are going to do tonight, but we're not David Paulides, so we don't have to, ride that fine line. It can kind of lead people and lead investigations, right? If you already go at them with an idea in mind. And so
Hmm.
these were books. They're very hard to find books, actually. If you happen to Google them or try to find them on Amazon now, they've stopped being printed. So if you find them, a lot of them are way more expensive than they probably should be. And there's also several documentaries. So I
Yep.
think altogether there's like 12 different medias that he's got out there with this stuff in it, books, documentaries, that you can go find. Amazon Prime, I know, has Missing 411 on it. And this also ties into a lot of other strange things, which I'm really excited to talk about. And there's a very famous picture, you may have seen it, Zach, of where all these people have gone missing. And then right below it, and we'll put this up on Instagram, right below it is a map of all the cave systems in the United
Yep.
States. And all of these people go missing around these massive cave systems, right? The Mammoth
Hmm.
Cave system. I don't know any other cave systems off the top of my head, but the Mammoth one I'm really going to talk about later because there's a specific event that happened around the Mammoth Cave system that isn't with missing 411, but a lot of people that spend their time researching this will attribute some of these disappearances to what I'll talk about. And I'll just throw it out there, tease it real quick, is the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. So if you don't know about it, and not a lot of people do, might teach you something tonight. I don't know if you know about it, Zach. Do you know about the Kelly Hopkinsville
I
incident?
do not. I do
Ooh,
not know about the Kelly, so I'm excited to hear that one.
dude, and I'll give you guys, with the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, I'm going to give you guys a really interesting Pokemon trivia fact. Yeah, out of left field,
Who's
right?
that Pokemon?
Who's that Pokemon? It's Pikachu. It's not Pikachu, actually.
Oh,
So,
darn
yeah.
it.
But yeah, man. So David Paulides essentially spent through this entire process of trying to find out what was going on with these missing peoples and national parks. So of course, the first place he started was pinging the National Park Service, the Forest Service, and asking, "Hey, are you guys aware that this is going on?" Right?
Hmm.
And come to find out essentially that there's no list of missing people that is kept right every year. And supposedly, according
Which,
to his website, there's 1,600 people a year on average that go missing from national parks, which is wild.
yeah, that blows my mind how they don't like keep track of or a list of people who might be missing. They
Right.
have huge records of like everyone who goes to the parks. They have crazy records of like all the animals in the parks, like where they go. They track them very, very well. Um, they track weather patterns. They track like the most minute things. They track bugs like to very, very intense detail, but you can't tell me that someone went into your park and went missing. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to me. How can you be like technically the National Park Service is like one of the largest like federal law enforcement entities because they just cover so much ground.
Right.
Um, and how can all of them just not have any idea who is missing in their parks when they have a very well documented list of people visiting the parks? Couldn't you
They
figure
do.
out if they didn't leave? Like, I'm really confused by that.
Yeah. So if you've ever visited a national park, those of you guys listening, you know that when you park, they literally ask you for your vehicle information, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they want to know that if you're parking wherever you are, that you're parking and going into the national park, right? It's not a public parking area. And for the most part, as far as I can remember, the national parks that I've been to, Glacier National Park in Montana, Yellowstone National Park,
Mm-hmm.
Yosemite, all of these, they ask you for parking information. Even some of the smaller national parks, like if you go, here in California, there's smaller national parks on the beach, right? It's
Yeah.
run by these National Park Service, and they track who goes in and out. So they are tracking people that do come in and out, and it wouldn't be hard to cross reference that. And you and I are both people who have spent over a decade apiece, right? 13 years for me
Mm-hmm.
doing law enforcement. And what is law enforcement all about? It's about procedure, and that means documentation.
Yep.
You document evidence, who's handling that evidence, who's coming in and out of a crime scene, all that stuff. And that is, it's not just about continuity, on a law enforcement level. It's about continuity when it comes time for court, right? You have to know who's
Yep.
handling that evidence so it's not tampered with or whatever. So it's very strange. And the other strange thing about it too is that the FBI gets called in very often to investigate these missing persons that happen in national parks, which is again very strange because unless it has something to do with a minor, the FBI, foul play with a minor, the FBI does not investigate missing persons.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all these very odd coincidences, or not, or odd situations, I should say. But
Yeah.
David Paulides met and has met a lot of barriers in getting information. He's tried some Freedom of Information Act requests, and those Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests. They've been denied, and then eventually he got an answer where it said, okay, if you want this comprehensive list of all these people that have gone missing in national parks, then you're going to have to pay $1 million or more to get this
So
list.
it was like millions. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was like a
yeah,
high number.
yeah. I think I remember reading it was $2.4 million to
Mm-hmm.
get this list, which is insane. And just having worked for the government for such a long time, we're very good at keeping lists. So to sit here and say that it's going to take millions of dollars to compile a list, to me just sounds like in a sidebar way of trying to stop somebody or discourage somebody from trying to get that information. So and again, there's a lot of coincidences that make this seem suspicious, right? And we're going to kind of get into some of that stuff.
Yeah. The thing about like it costing money for the list, like that
Mm-hmm.
tells me because at first they were saying, "Oh, we can't compile this list. We don't track this." But then
Yeah.
they come out and say, "Oh, it'll be like 2.4 million for this list." That in a way says that they have the ability to make this list and to track it accordingly. They just want $2.4 million for it to kind of get you to stop asking questions. Like that
That's
doesn't
exactly what it is.
if you had the ability to make the list, then and then also like if someone was inquiring about it, wouldn't you still as an agency be like, okay, well maybe we should just start the list now because then you could just start it and then continue it on. But they didn't even start it, and it's been what like 10 plus years since this started really being like investigated, and they still haven't started a list.
Yeah. So that's just like David Paulides' investigations. It's been more than that. It's been more than 10 years.
Yeah.
But a lot of these cases in his investigations, there's one that I'm going to talk about tonight that goes back to 1938. Um,
Oh wow.
yeah, and it meets criteria. Obviously, David Paulides wasn't around in investigating this in 1938, but it meets the criteria of a lot of cases that he investigates. And that's another thing with these cases is they have a lot of very weird things in common. And I'm just gonna pull up my notes here real quick and get at them because they're very strange. And Zach, if I miss anything that you found, let me know. But a lot of these are these incidents. These people go missing. They go missing when they are in groups very often.
Hmm.
This isn't every incident, but it's a lot of them. They go missing when they're in a group. They go missing near water. The searches are almost always put off because there's some sort of inclement weather incident that happens once that person is declared missing. Very often they are near large groups of rocks, so like a boulder outcropping, and very often those boulders are made of granite, which, just saying, is what the Georgia Guidestones were made out of. It's very, very strange, right? There's some
Weird.
mystical properties there. It is. It's just weird, and that's all I'm saying, right? And in '97, and this is directly from the website, 97%, okay, of these cases, canines are unable to actually pick up a scent trail, right?
Yep.
And very often, tracks are not found by searchers, and of course, if you're trained in looking for somebody who's gone missing, you're taught what it looks like when somebody is, traveling through brush or leaving prints and signs of human remains. But the other thing too is the missing persons, their remains, their belongings are almost always found in an area that has already been visited by search and rescue. It's very common to find those belongings and the remains apart from each other, but in areas that don't make a lot of sense. Example meaning very far off from where that person should be, or found
Hmm.
in a location that's so far away from where they were in the time between when they gone missing and when their remains are found, it's not logical for them to have traveled that far. Including one of these stories involves a 2-year-old child who supposedly traveled 15 miles overnight within 12
That's
hours. And
insane.
it is. And there is, I'm trying to remember his name now, but not Bear Grylls, but another guy who does survival. He's on TV.
It was the
He
Man
tried.
versus Wild, right?
It is, yeah. He tried to cover that distance at night on his own, a grown man, and was unable to do it. So how on earth could a 2-year-old child do it? So there's all these very strange things with these cases that don't necessarily mean anything, but they do, because you can't, you sit here, I'm like the guy with the thing behind me with all the strings and the notes and all this stuff, and I'm trying to get you to, right, and that, but it's all just very weird.
Yeah. Some of the things I was going to add to the list is typically when they do find their belongings, they're like neatly kept. Either their
Yeah.
clothes are folded,
Hmm.
they're like is like propped up
Right.
in like a neat area. And then another thing too is majority, not all, of course, but majority of the people who do go missing tend to be very fit and intelligent individuals
Yeah.
who are adamant outdoors.
Yeah.
Either they hike a lot, or they camp a lot, or they're very used to the area that they go missing in. That too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. And aside from, like I said, the 2-year-old, right, that did this, he was actually found, which is great, but not all of the children that have gone missing are found. The other thing I
Correct.
found weird too, like I said, is they go missing from a group, and a lot of these they're very close to their group when they go missing, whether they're hiking like in
Hmm.
a line with their group, or they're in the campsite and they just happen to wander off real quick to go take a leak or walk down to the body of water, and they go missing, right? And we can start jumping into some of these cases. If you want, man, you can lead off if you want with the first case you want to talk about. I've got a couple on here,
Yeah, for sure.
reference wise. They all have common threads, but yeah, if you want to kick us off, man.
Yeah, so I've got three of them here, and I'll start off with this first one. This involves Stephen Kubacki or Kubaki. I can't
Mm,
pronounce his name, last
yeah,
name properly. Um, but this guy actually goes missing, but he is eventually comes to and is found, but way later, which is really confusing. So in February of 1977, Stephen, who was a 25 or 24-year-old man, avid cross country skier, been doing it ever since he was like a teenager, was cross country skiing through the snow near Lake Michigan. Um, he reached the edge of the lake. He decided to take a little of a break, so he took his skis off and he sat down. And then he says, because he was found and he was interviewed later on, he says that he only sat down for like 10, 15 minutes. And when he got up to leave, his skis were gone and they were right next to him. And he thought that was odd. And then he also noticed that there was no tracks. So he had no way to kind of remember where he came from. So he said he became lost. So the last thing he remembered after noticing that was walking through the snow, feeling numb and exhausted, and then he blacked out. And then in the blink of an eye, from his perspective, it was now spring. He was lying in a grassy field in the middle of a forest, wearing clothes that weren't his. Sitting next to him was a backpack that wasn't his, containing equipment and shoes and glasses that didn't belong to him. Um, and he was really confused. So he decided to hike to the nearest town and ask a local person like what was going on. He hiked into Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which is 700 miles away from where he went missing. He knocked on the door of some random house that he found. An elderly woman was like, "How can I help you?" He asked if he could use a phone. He called his fiance back home, and
Mm-hmm.
after realizing and speaking with the fiance, he had been missing for 14 months. No one had seen him for 14 months,
That's
and he had no
wild.
idea how he went from Lake Michigan and then showed up 700 miles away with a whole bunch of new stuff and everything. Um, the official explanation by doctors is that he had some type of like fugue state or some type of
Mm-hmm.
amnesia.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of doctors are also baffled by this because it's very rare for someone to have that long of a fugue state or
Mm-hmm.
for that large chunk of a time frame to just be missing from someone's like mind or memory
Right.
without something coming up. He was even been to like a psychologist who tried like hypnosis to like remember stuff that he did, and still to the day that he eventually passed away, because he did pass away from cancer in the early 2000s.
Hmm.
He still was unable to ever remember anything that happened during the 14 months that he was missing. He has no recollection memory of it at all, and he kind of was like fixated on it, tried to figure it out, and he couldn't even figure it out. So it's just weird. Went missing 700 miles away, woke up in just a random field, wearing different clothes, had different items for 14 months.
Dude, I feel like you would live the rest of your life in fear that that would happen again. Dude,
Oh
and like
yeah,
it would be hard to like think like, you know, well, if this happened to me this one time, I don't want to get married or have kids, you know, and then disappear for 15 months or longer. Like, what if you never come out of that state or whatever? If indeed it was some sort of mental state that happened to him, like that would, I feel like that would alter like the decisions you make later in life, you know, about, geez, even about something as simple as getting in a car and driving somewhere.
for
Definitely
sure.
going out
I
cross country skiing again.
Yeah, that was actually something I was thinking about. I was like, I'd be so afraid to do anything that would potentially put me in danger if I just randomly went back into my fugue state. But what's crazy is they like tested his brain, they did like MRIs and CAT scans, and there was nothing wrong with him. He's perfectly healthy. He never had this issue ever again, and he never had it before. So it's just kind of odd.
Yeah, I feel like if you, I mean, and I'm not a doctor, so this is just me speculating, but if you have this state, this fugue state that you're in, that you might have other indicators that you have some sort of, you know, neurological disorder going on. You don't just randomly go into like a waking coma essentially, because you got to think for 15
Hmm.
months he had to eat, he had to drink, he had to probably interact with other people, and he was wearing clothes that weren't
Yeah.
his, he didn't have his own belongings, he was laying out in the middle of a field, right? I mean, you
Hmm.
had to, he had to survive for 15 months, and you know, if you're in that sort of state, like what are you doing for money, right? Are you relying on the goodwill of other people? That's another thing too. It makes me wonder, like now that you're talking, are we talking about this and like, you know, relying on other people? I'm kind of surprised that there's no one that's come forward after this is made, you know, the news and been like, no, I know him, and that's, you know, that's actually Brian Jones or whatever, and you know, the, whatever,
Yeah.
you know, and said like, yeah, man, we met randomly and we were friends, and I let him crash at my place for a couple months until he, you know, until he just bounced one morning or whatever, you know, and there's no one come out and said like I recognize that person. So to me, it's like if you survive for 15 months and you made it from, you know, the part of Michigan, you know, or Michigan all the way to Massachusetts, right? So you went from the Midwest basically in the winter,
The East
right, all the way to
Coast.
the East
Yeah.
Coast, right? That you would have had to have relied on people, you know, whether you were hitchhiking or you made friends or
Hmm.
whatever, right? So there had to be people that interacted with him if he was in that fugue state. And I don't know what somebody looks like when they're in a fugue state, but or to where you could be like, oh yeah, something's kind of off with them, like they look like they're sleepwalking or whatever, or it's almost like
Mm-hmm.
one of these things where like you're now interacting with somebody who seems like they have a different personality, and if you've never met them before, you wouldn't know that this isn't who they are. Like if I've known you for a while, right? And if like one day we link up and you're all of a sudden talking about how much you hate Formula One racing, I'd be like, you're an imposter. Who are you? You know what I mean? And like, what's
The
going on?
drones got to you.
The drones got to you, dude. The birds, or like, something, right? And you were like, I'm actually the world's second greatest recruiter. I'd be like, dude, what happened to Zach? And but you would think, there had to be somebody that helped him out at some point, whether financially or
Yeah.
just food and water or a ride. It makes me think too, like if this would have happened nowadays, that somebody really quickly could have come out and said, oh yeah, I know who that is, and that's not who they said they were. You know what I mean? And there could be a whole
Mm-hmm.
string of people who'd be like, I interacted with this person in Indiana, and I interacted with this person in Ohio, and I interacted with this, you know what I mean? And like, you just, how else are you going to make it
Well,
around?
wait until I tell you. You're gonna be kind of interested when I tell you about my third person.
Okay.
My third person is very similar to what I just told you about Steven, except it happened in the last 5 years.
Okay.
So it's very, very similar, and we'll get to it later. It's a little teaser for those listening to stay tuned how those connect. But yeah, even back then, it's like the police investigated it and everything. They tried to interview people all the way from where he went missing to where he was found. And like you said, still to this day, no one has come forward saying they helped him or they guided him or anything. He literally apparently just disappeared for 14 months and then showed up in a field with different clothes, which is just
That,
strange. And we'll get to our theories stuff a little bit later, but
yes.
um, yeah, it's very interesting. I have my theory of what happened, and it can be for some listeners or people watching, it can be a little out there, but um, there's a lot that we as humans and as a species don't know about the universe, and I think there can be some things that could easily explain this that maybe we're just not ready to accept.
Yeah, for sure. Or maybe we're going to be forced to accept, especially with a lot of this disclosure that's come out. Because, I'll just say right off the bat, without jumping too far into it, that, UFOs have
Hmm.
been used as an explanation for the missing 411. There's even a documentary that came out that David Paulides did that's called Missing 411, the UFO Connection, and kind of linking
Hmm.
some of these cases of people who've been abducted and, they went abducted out of a national park, so they start fitting into this category, right? And so he did a documentary about that as well. But that's not the only theory people have. And we've kind of like indirectly mentioned one of the theories in the Zack Attack episode. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, man, that one I have heard about that one before, but not jumped into it as much as you did. And that's just really strange because without it being that fugue state, right? Occam's razor. What's the most simple explanation? Essentially, and I know that's actually a simple way of describing Occam's razor. That's not exactly what it is, but
Yeah.
generically, the most simple explanation, one without the most fabrication needing to support your conclusion. Um, that makes sense, but it doesn't with all this other stuff, and some other
Yeah.
ideas come to mind that we just don't have the ability to prove at this moment. Um, and some of these
Yeah.
other
And they
ones, go ahead, man.
I was gonna say they like tested him too. Like he was perfectly healthy. He
Mm-hmm.
wasn't malnourished. Like nothing. So that means like he was eating well. He wasn't like surviving off the land in some
Mm-hmm.
random caveman fugue state. Like he's wearing like decent clothes that were clean. Like it's just
And here's the
there's so
thing,
many there's so many things. It's just so weird.
right? And here's the thing too. There's a couple things that come to mind when we are going to talk about some of these other cases. Is that he survived, right? If indeed
Hmm.
like this, he survived. He made his way somewhere else. He forgot who he was for a period of time. Never recovered those memories, right? What if some of these other people whose remains weren't found, because there have been people whose remains were found, and we'll, kind of talk about how weird that is.
Hmm.
But what if some of these people went missing and they never snapped out of their alter identity, right? And they are existing other places now. And
Yeah.
these a lot of these cases, like I said, this one right here, I'm going to talk about this one first. Is from 1938, right?
Okay.
This it's a kid. He was 4 years old, right? I mean, could he still be alive? If he, unfortunately, he did pass away in this one. But if somebody from that time period or even afterwards, they'd be really old. Their parents wouldn't be around anymore. Now, with the way social media is and the way information gets around, you wouldn't know. If the
Yeah.
last time you saw your child, as sad as this is, was 4 years old, and you probably would not recognize, even if you were still alive, the way they looked if they were in their 60s, or their 50s or older. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't even know. Especially if, like I said, if they just never came out of this like weird state that they ended up in because of some weird like cross dimension shit or whatever. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, man. This next one, this is the oldest one supposedly, right? So if you're listening and you know one that is referenced from an earlier time period, feel free to let us know on Instagram. But
Yeah, just
this
tell
one
us
is
we're
the
wrong.
tell us we're wrong. Don't just tell us we're wrong. Tell us we're wrong, and then tell us how you're right, and then give us some good information,
Yeah.
right?
Make sure it's all
Uh,
caps though, so we know where you're yelling.
exactly. And if you could use a few choice emojis, that'd be even better.
Mm-hmm.
So this one is the case of 4-year-old, like I said, Alfred Balehartz. Okay, and this was on July 2nd, 1938, and this one happened in Rocky Mountain National Park. So Alfred went on a traditional Father's Day camping trip with his dad and his grandfather, and his dad and his grandfather had gone to this campsite since his dad was a kid, right? So this is something, and it's a place that both the father and the grandfather knew very, very well, right? And Alfred had been here before, but he's 4 years old, so
Yeah.
there's not a term of reference there for him. And
Mm-hmm.
while they were at the campsite, another family who was camping near them noticed that their children were around the same age that Alfred was, right? And so they made conversation, became, kind of friends out there on the campsites, and, the kids became acquainted and started playing together. Well, it got to the point essentially where the kids, decided they were going to play this prank on the adults, and they were going to hide behind the trees, and everyone, the adults knew. And Alfred's dad watched, Alfred go behind a tree and was paying attention. If that was my kid, I'd be watching too, you know.
Of
And then
course.
when the kids jumped out as part of the joke to scare the adults, Alfred did not jump out with the rest of the kids, which isn't that odd. Kids that are that young, they don't, the element of surprise and plan to surprise, right? They're not, wouldn't be unusual for him to pop out 5-10 seconds later and do it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
synchronized stuff at 4 years old is a little bit more difficult. Well, his dad watched the tree. Alfred did not jump out and didn't take his eyes off the trees, yelled for him, asked him to come out, and he didn't. So he approached the tree. And when he got to the tree, Alfred was no longer behind that tree. And up until the point where Alfred, like I said, went behind the tree, his dad watched him go behind it and then watched the specific tree, right? So you would think he'd have seen Alfred, go left or right away from it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when he didn't see Alfred behind the tree, he took off into the rest of the forest behind that tree and in a direction away from it, but into the forest. And went, according to his testimony that he gave the police, for about 2 miles without seeing Alfred, and didn't see him, which of course initiated a search and rescue. And here's one of the things: this the case with Alfred meets some of these criterias. A lot of some of the other people around the campsites, the families and the search officials felt that he may have wandered near the river that was close there and
Okay.
fallen in, right? Which what it is, is a logical conclusion to come to. So what they did was they dammed the river to prevent his body or whatever from floating further down, and then they raked the bottom of the river and didn't find anything. Okay, and his dad felt like that's not something that Alfred would do, is wander towards the water, and he just felt that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, and here's another one of these check marks on these boxes where a lot of these cases have similarities, is they called in a search dog team, okay? And the dogs were able to pick up a scent, but they led them to a rock outcropping, okay? And when the dogs got to this rock outcropping, it was a sheer 500-foot cliff face, okay? And the dogs sat, indicating that, hey, here's where the scent ends, and we've found what it is that you're asking us to look for, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, they're like, okay, there's no way this should end like this, okay? And so they actually brought in another team of bloodhounds to follow the scent. And the same thing happened with those bloodhounds, is they walked all the way to that cliff face and then signaled that, hey, this is where this ends. And so, obviously, this cliff face is called Devil's Nest, okay, and it was a very like popular cliff for rock climbers in Rocky
Hmm.
National Park, okay, Rocky Mountain National Park. And so they ended up going to the top of the cliff face, this plateau. They looked for Alfred, didn't find anything, okay, but later, 24 hours later, a couple who was on a trail 6 miles away from where Alfred went missing, okay, stopped at a bench to take a break, get some food, and the man in the couple noticed off in the distance, the Devil's Nest, this plateau, this cliff face, that there was a male child looking and walking around the edge and was like looking over the top of the plateau, right? And he remembered thinking, he said that seemed really odd, but then noticed that it looked like somebody snatched him back away from the edge. So to him, not knowing that Alfred was missing, thought that there was a parent or somebody up there with the child, and did the logical thing and pulled the kid away from the edge of this cliff face. It was only after they realized that there was a child missing that they reported it to officials, right?
Wow.
There's no way to know if that was Alfred, but the coincidences again and similarities are kind of too close to not think that it is Alfred. And
Hmm.
so that, but unfortunately, that didn't yield any sort of result. But the cliff face is 6 miles away from where Alfred went missing. And 6 miles would be a lot for a child to cover, especially when you consider this was 24 hours later, okay? He would
Hmm.
have had to make it 6 miles away and up this cliff face, right? And, thinking about a 4-year-old staying overnight in a forest in Rocky Mountain National Park, even during the summer, right? It's going to get down into, at least, the low 40s, maybe high 30s at night, especially with tree cover. And
Hmm.
it would be very hard for a 4-year-old to survive something like that. And I guess as long as it didn't get below freezing, they probably could if they weren't picked off or fell or hurt themselves or whatever. But to be seen the next day, and being pulled away from the cliff face by something or somebody is very odd. So unfortunately, Alfred was found. His remains were found. And the small part of his skull cap was found, which is the top part of your skull. And that's another thing that's very common with these situations, is that when human remains are found, very specific parts of their remains are found. And the skull cap is one of those, and so are teeth, which is
Hmm.
kind of odd when you think about it.
Yeah, it's really strange. It's just like you're saying, it's very interesting to think of a child traveling that distance. But I would also be like, almost feel like something would have to almost induce the child or seduce the child to like want to follow or
Mm-hmm.
leave. Like
Right,
you're right behind a tree. Like
right,
what what enticed you to just go away and then within a minute not pay attention or listen to your father calling for you or not
right.
you make any noise either? Like it's why would you just randomly just go, or I'm just gonna run dead sprint into these woods and not respond to anyone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're playing hide and seek, and maybe you're thinking your father's like trying to hide you, and you're just still trying to be quiet. But at some point, you as a child, I feel like even as a kid, you can pick up on tones, and you would
Mm-hmm.
understand like your father's not playing anymore and is
Mm-hmm.
actually like worried, and you would like just know to stop. Like I remember when I was very little, if my dad was yelling at me, I knew what was joking and what was, oh crap, I'm about to get my butt spanked. So
Right.
I don't know why he wouldn't either.
No, I mean, I definitely, even now my son, right? He's not even 2, and if I use
Hmm.
certain tones, like he knows I mean business, and he'll stop, you know.
Yeah.
And even if when like my wife is talking to him, even if I start telling him to stop doing what he's doing, he'll kind of sometimes listen a little better than when mom is telling it to him. It's just like a
Hmm.
your dad voice or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's true, man. And unfortunately, this time it was a child that was recovered in a deceased state. And but that is the oldest one that I found. And there's a couple on here that I have are that are children, and the rest are adults. And like you said earlier, they are people that should know the woods. And these are hunters. These are people that are like nature photographers that understand the risk that they're getting into, and
Hmm.
go in prepared. They don't go off on their own. So without any, sort of supplies or knowledge and letting somebody know they're going to they're going to go out into the woods or whatever. So
Yeah. Did it say specifically where they found the remains? Were they close to where the kid went missing, or were they like really
yes.
far away or something?
So the remains, it said, were 11 miles away from where he would have been missing, and again, they were inside like a crevice essentially, which talk about there are specific animals and there are predatorial animals that do hide food, right, or things that they're saving for later inside rock crevices, right? But it doesn't explain some of the other stuff that happens, right? In some of these other cases, they find these remains in boulder outcroppings, or other crevices, right? And they're all these odd places they shouldn't be able to get to, but then they find their clothes or a backpack or a hunting rifle or a bow or
Hmm.
whatever, and they're stacked up and it looks like somebody left it there. And you'd think if you happen upon a backpack leaned up against a tree with a hunting vest and a bow next to it, you'd be like, oh, that's somebody's stuff and they're going to come back. Maybe they're off taking a dump behind a tree or something. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? And you would
Hmm.
think to yourself, either I'm just going to leave this here, or you might wait and see if somebody comes back for it. You know what I mean? And so it's just that's the thing, man, that has always gotten me about these cases is that stuff, man. Like why? And the other thing too is they usually find these items in places that have already been searched. It's almost like somebody knows that that area has been searched, so they go back into it and place these items, or that's where their remains are found, right? And
Hmm.
and then they find them later, and some of these are even years later or months later, right? And it's normally not the search party that finds these remains. It's another hiker or another hunter or somebody else that's just out there camping, and they find this stuff. And then of course
Yeah.
through the course of saying I found this, they're like, oh shit, we looked there a year ago or whatever. So
Yeah. No, that's very strange. Did you have more to add about Alfred
not
or
for not for him. I do have, like I
okay?
said, I've got a couple other ones, but you know, if you want, I mean, I can go into another one, or you could talk about another one of the cases you have. But all of mine, like I said, they all have these similar features or attributes to them that make them, odd to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Uh, yeah, I can go into this next one. It kind of has stuff about like clothes being left behind and
Mm-hmm.
someone just kind of disappearing very very quickly. Um,
Yeah.
so this is about an older woman. So she's in her 60s. Um, I believe 62.
Mm-hmm.
And her name is Rosemary Kuntz.
Mm-hmm.
And she went missing in August of 2000. Now, a
Mm-hmm.
little backstory on Rosemary. So she was happily married, and about 5 years before she went missing, her husband and herself were in a car accident, and unfortunately, the husband passed away. And so she went through like extensive physical therapy to kind of get back to her original self. Before the accident, she was a very avid hiker. Um, Her and her husband would go hiking and go on trips out in the woods for days, weeks on ends, and so she's a very used to this kind of lifestyle. So it took her about a year to finish her physical therapy, kind of get back to where she was. And for a 60-year-old woman, she was very, very active, and that's what a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people who was around her said. She was very active. Um, so in August of 2000, she's kind of feeling down about missing her husband and a whole bunch of other stuff. And she heard of a trip done by a local Indian reservate or Indian tribe on a reservation in Northern California, ran by a guy named Red Hawk. And Red Hawk would take the group up to a place called Woolly Creek, and you would go to a lake called Spirit Lake. And it was a place where you could feel very in tune, like with
Mm-hmm.
people who had passed. So she thought, screw it, I'll go there. I'll think about my husband, and we'll do that. So she met up with a group of about 10 other people, plus Red Hawk, a cook, and Red Hawk's son,
Mm-hmm.
whose name was Shallot or Shallot. Um,
Little Onion.
so yeah, Little Onion. So they went on this trip. It was going to be like 2 days to get to the lake, and then they would stay 2 days there, and then 2 days the whole group would come back. So they're in a group this whole time, right? So they all make it to the lake, no issues, no problem. Um, they stay the first night there, and then they get up early in the morning, and Red Hawk says, "Hey, we're gonna go climb up. We're gonna go out the trail a little bit and up to the top of a hill, where you can kind of see the lake from above.
Yeah.
And we're gonna go up there and stuff." And Rosemary said that she didn't want to go, along with another person said that they didn't want to go. And Shallot and the cook were also just gonna stay at the campsite. The cook was gonna get like stuff prepared for like lunch and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Shallot was just gonna stay back because he didn't want to go either. So rest of the group went with Red Hawk. You had the three adults, the cook, Rosemary, and some other person, and then Shallot left at the campsite. Now, to give you some context, the lake they're at is like in a basin, and the
Okay.
basin has like a 70-degree angle, like sheer cliffs all the way around. It was
Yeah.
this lake is in an old volcano that had imploded upon itself at some point, like thousands of years ago. And the only way in and out is one trail that goes through the campsite that they're at. The
Right.
only way in and out. Okay. There is a trail that goes around the lake, and the lake's only like a mile wide, or like half a mile wide, or something like that. So it's less than a mile wide. You can see anywhere on the trail pretty much every other end of the lake, give or take some foliage or trees. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so Rosemary was kind of like feeling a little like, I want to go for a walk. And so she goes up to the cook and says, "Hey, can you make me like a lunch, like to go lunch or whatever, for this trip? I'm gonna go on a walk around the lake, just on, and then kind of see how I feel, and then I'll come back." She asked the other adult if they wanted to come. They said no thanks, and she asked Shallot to also if like he wanted to come. They both said no. Okay, and that's important information for later for when we get to like theories
Yeah.
that law enforcement thought of. So she goes on her walk. And this little walk should have took like maybe 25, 30 minutes, and then she'd be back. And that's what she told everyone. She never returned.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Never came back, right? So Red Hawk and the group comes back, and Red Hawk's like, Where'd Rosemary go? And Shout's like, "Oh, she went on a walk." Cook's like, "I gave her a lunch bag. She said she'd be back." Red Hawk goes, "Okay, well, when she leave?" And he's like, "Well, I left like over an hour ago, 2 hours ago." And he's like, "Well, that's weird. She should be back by now, but maybe she like went out there and is just kind of enjoying nature. She just sat down somewhere. She's just enjoying nature."
Right.
Well, sun starts to go down. Red Hawk's getting worried. So he decides, all right, everyone, we're going to go try to find Rosemary. So the trail to go around the lake splits and then goes around, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's at the campsite, one way in, one way out, and it just goes around. So he
Okay.
divided the groups into two, and they went around to go find her. They went around, they meet each other on the other end. Nothing. She doesn't exist on the trail. No one saw her. There's no evidence of her going anywhere or anything like that. So Red Hawk is like kind of confused. So he tells his son to leave, like to leave the campsite, go back down to the bottom and tell a park ranger who's at the very beginning of like this area. So
Mm-hmm.
Shallot goes, tells a park ranger, and starts this whole search in this whole area. So they get like 100 and something volunteers, like a ton of people, and they're searching this whole basin and everything. Um, the top of this basin still has like snow kind of on it
Mm-hmm.
too. So like they're checking, there's no trails of it in the snow. Um, They never find any evidence of her getting out through the basin. Also, it'd be like almost impossible because it's like cliffs. She'd have to like really climb out of it.
Right.
Um, but they never found her. But about a week after looking for her, um, they found, or not they, someone else who was hiking in the area, who was also at the lake, kind of just going around. They found her jacket that she was wearing,
Mm.
perfectly folded on a tree stump right next to the trail in eyesight. Right, her shoes, the sandwich uneaten, spoiled in the bag, and her hat, and that was it. And it was all neatly left on a stump in eyesight of the trail in a place that people had been looking for the last week. No one ever found it. They still have no idea where she went, where she is. She's just completely gone. Um, the police, the running theory is that she missed her husband, and the whole trip for her was a suicide like thing. She was going to go out there and commit suicide. But the caveat that a lot of people say is if she was going to go commit suicide, why would she ask the cook to make her a lunch? Why would she ask the cook and Shallot and the other adult to go with her on this walk?
That part makes
It
sense.
because if they said yes, then how would she be able to commit suicide, right?
Right.
And if she was out there to commit suicide, did she wait several days to leave her clothes behind and then do it? And if so, where's her body? How did she commit suicide? They searched the lake. They searched outside the edge of this cliff basin. They searched well out in other areas. There's still to this day, that was in 2000, still to this day, there's nothing ever been found about her. And that's a well visited area. Like, it's not a place like no one goes to. Like, a ton of people visit this area all the time. So,
See,
just strange.
these are elements of these cases that really creep me out, man, because it almost is like serial killer like behavior, like taunting.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, you looked here, you come back, and then here's this neatly folded jacket, the spoiled sandwich, the shoes, the hat, all just placed here for you. And it's not even like, oh, like I'm taunting you. It's like almost like a calling card and like a hello. I
Yeah.
know I know you were here too, and I'm going to leave this for you to find right here. And that whole theory about her, wanting to kill herself, like asking the cook to make a sandwich, bring it out there. I mean, like just be real. Through the course of my career, I've been involved in investigating suicides, and people do a lot of really odd stuff to make it seem like things are normal right before they
Hmm.
do that, to not tip other people off. So
True.
asking for a sandwich, maybe she, if that was true, maybe she had intention on eating the sandwich as a last meal, or maybe she had intention on asking for the sandwich to appear normal, right, to wander off on a
Hmm.
hike on herself. But that piece about asking other people to go with you, if that was your intention, you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
So, and that's, to me, if that's the official line on what happened to her, is some sort of suicide, due to a broken heart because of her husband, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it seems like too, and I would have to know like how big this lake was that you said that like the trail went around and they met up. That you would think too that it's not so big to where if she was indeed attacked by a human or by an animal or killed herself or something, if she used the gun, I guess, or you would hear some sort of scream if
Hmm.
she was attacked by somebody. It's not that big to where you wouldn't hear a scream, and especially
And
if you're wandering off on a trail that you should be back in 30 minutes, you're going to be in earshot for a scream.
yep. And there's only one way in and out to this
Yeah,
basin. So it's not, and the cook, Shallot, and the other person were there the whole time. Unless they were
yeah.
all asleep at the same time, there's no way she like walked out of there without being noticed. And then if there was someone else, either A, it had to be someone from the group who killed her, but
Right.
they were all accounted for, or someone was already out there and
Mm-hmm.
just prime of opportunity, but then they still could only go in and out this one way. So like
With that, and you would
how
think
did
you would
how
hear
did they get out?
somebody's, yeah, you would
Yeah.
hear her screaming for help. You know what I mean? And there would be somebody struggling with her, and there would be potentially evidence of that. And I don't know. That just, to me, is again like these situations that don't make a lot of sense, but have all these really odd coincidences. And I'll kind of go over two of them real quick. Again, these all are, this one of these involves a body of water. They both involve, rock outcroppings, right? And
Yeah.
yours just now, body of water, right? And I'll just say this
Surrounded by
too,
rocks. Yeah.
surrounded by rocks, right? And one of the theories I think links up with why bodies of water. There's a couple of them have reasons why I think link up with bodies of water, but you know, when you're living out in the woods, what do you want to be by all the time? You want to be by a
Water.
water source. Yeah.
Yep.
So this one is relatively recent. This is from 2014, and this one was actually featured on the Missing 411 documentary. Um, this is a case of Aaron Hedges. He went out elk hunting. This is September 5th, 2014 is when he went out. So the Crazy Mountains in Montana, that's what they're called, the Crazies, it was like their nickname. Went elk hunting with some friends. This is a place that he'd gone hunting several times. And if you've ever been hunting with a group of people, you know that you don't stay together when you're hunting. You kind of split up. Whether you have somebody that goes out and you have the other two kind of pushing the deer or whatever towards that person or
Hmm.
whatever. You don't stay together. I guess if you're sitting in a duck blind with some friends or something like that, you would. But they were elk hunting, right? So
Yep.
went in with some friends. Decided that he was going to break off from the trail and go out towards a cache that he had set up that had some items that he wanted out of it. And he was on walkie-talkie comms with the friends, right? And at one point he checked in saying he missed a turnoff, that he had to go back and find the turnoff to get to the cache, and that he was okay. And that was the last time he said anything to anybody or anybody heard from him, okay?
Well, this
Um,
cache also tells you that like he's been here a lot.
oh, yeah,
If he has a
absolutely.
cache there, he's
Hmm.
been to this location
Yeah,
a lot.
if you because I'll say this too, right? And they say this in the documentary. And if you've ever lived in Montana, and I lived there for 8 years, especially up in the mountains, the weather can change on you like that, and you could be stuck out there in this flash snowstorm, or it just gets really cold at night because it's Montana, right? And you're out in the mountains. There's the tree cover, there's the mountains, there's the wind, all that stuff, okay? And the legend behind the crazies is that they're cursed, okay? So they kind of tie that into the documentary, to Native American curse. It's Montana, right? So,
Hmm.
but right after he went missing, okay, they decided, hey, okay, it's been too much time. We haven't heard from Aaron, and we need to go and find him, okay? So they, contacted police, they contacted search and rescue. Well, they decided, because of all the land that they had to cover, okay, to find him with the snow coming in and all this, that they were going to use a helicopter, okay, which is not uncommon. It's very common to use a search helicopter looking for somebody. Well,
Hmm.
it just so happens that right as they were going to fill up the helicopter, they were going to take it out there, a freak snowstorm happened. And they decided, with the seriousness of him being missing and a human life at risk, that they were going to go out anyway. Well, this helicopter, with all 5 people on this helicopter, it crashed. Okay, everybody survived, right? But the fact that, again, there's some sort of adverse weather incident that happens right when this person goes missing, and they're going to start looking for them. It ties into some other things. And one of the theories behind this is that this has like some sort of interdimensional aspect to it, okay, or UFO aspect to it. And that essentially, the theory goes that they go missing, they know people are going to go looking for them, and then something is able to manipulate the environment that prevents people from going and looking for them and potentially finding whatever took that person. So whether it's some sort of interdimensional being, interdimensional Bigfoot, right? In one of these cases, the Dennis Martin case, does have to do with a Bigfoot, an eyewitness account, okay? But these adverse weather effects, and it prevented them from going out and finding him. Well, initially, that happened. They were able to go back out again, and they went out without a helicopter. But of course, the search and rescue was unsuccessful. Well, rescue workers did find his shoes and his camelback, his water reservoir, right? 2 days
Yeah.
later, okay? Um, but it was 6 miles away from where he supposedly went missing, and it was in the opposite direction. Okay, so the trail that he was following was a trail that the other people that he was hiking or hunting with knew where it was going. Okay, they had this mapped out. Okay, and it
Mm-hmm.
went the exact opposite direction where he should have gone. And again, this isn't his first time out here. He knows, like you said, he set up a cache, which is like a thing. I'm going to go get this if I'm in trouble, kind of thing, right? I know where this is.
Mm-hmm.
But he should have known where he was going. Okay, but that's what they found. Rescue workers found his shoes 2 days after, shoes in his camelback. But 9 months later, his backpack, his bow, socks, shirt, sweatpants, and an orange hunting vest were found piled by a tree. This was 6 miles away from where his shoes were found, and 15 total miles from where he was originally separated from his group. Okay, and the thing with this is that location where those items were found, and again, they were set up next to a tree. Okay, they were set up in view of a house and a road. Okay, so you would think that if you are indeed lost, and it was on kind of a hill, which is what people do, right? When they're lost, you go to a high vantage point because you can see, okay, if you get to the point where like, oh, there's a road, I can head that direction or whatever.
Yeah.
Or if there's a helicopter looking for you, you're more visible. But somebody could see a road and could see a house. And if you've lost and you're 15 miles, if you're way out there and away from everybody and you don't know where you're at, and then all of a sudden you see a house, I mean, that's like the first place you're going to go. You know what I mean? Or at the very least, if you see a road, you're going to go to the road hoping that, A, obviously that road's going to lead somewhere to somebody, right? Or a car will drive by or something like that. But they found all of his stuff. It looked like somebody had just taken it all out. And oddly enough, this is the stuff that was in his cache. Okay?
So he got
Sweatpants.
to his cache.
Yeah, exactly. So again, why this experienced, elk hunter in Montana who understands, he's Montana born and raised, right? Understands the risks, going out in the mountains, elk hunting with his friends, has a couple caches up in the mountains, knows where he's going. They had walkie-talkies, for comms, orange hunting vest, his bow, right? Which is definitely, if you're lost in the woods and you had a bow, you're not going to leave that anywhere. Like that is like, the thing you're going to hold on to, because at this point, you're able to hunt for food, and B, it's a form of self-defense. You know what I mean? If you're out there in the woods, you're going to keep your bow,
Mm-hmm.
screw the sweatpants. You know what I mean? I'm going to take the bow with me, that kind of thing, So,
Yeah.
this is one of those cases that is really, really strange because it doesn't make any sense when you consider the person that goes missing and the items that get left behind, right? So, and it begs a lot of questions, right? Did somebody get to the point where, they were hypothermic? And there is something that happens to your body when you become hypothermic right before you die. You start getting hot. So
Yep.
they do find people, they start stripping.
Well, you actually you don't get hot. You feel like you're getting hot.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you feel like you're getting hot. So, at this point, you're going to die. Okay, and
Yeah.
your brain is starting to shut down, and that's why you're feeling this way. People strip, or they've even found people who have gotten into bodies of water, like puddles and stuff like that, like thinking
Yeah, to
they're going to
cool
cool
off.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously at this point you are no longer the person you were. You're about to die, and you've kind
I
of
think it's
lost your
called like
mind.
paradoxal undressing or something. I
It
think.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but again, like you would, if somebody is at that point where they're about to die, that they're taking off their clothes, right? You're gonna find their remains very close to that location, right? You're gonna find their
Yeah.
body, right? And that's
Yeah.
not the case here. Okay, Aaron actually has never been recovered, right?
I was just
It's
gonna
still,
ask that.
yeah, it's still missing. It's still an active case in Montana. Like I said, it's almost 10 years now, right? September 5th, 2014. But that, again, another very odd case. And then this one is also relatively older. Dennis Martin, another little kid. 1969, Smoky Mountains National Park. Went missing. This massive search effort. David Paulides, when he came across this case, actually ended up speaking to a family. Their last name is Key. so the Key family. And the day that David went missing, or excuse me, Dennis went missing, they had gone out as a family, found a park ranger, and asked, "Hey, where is a spot in the park where we might see a bear to see a bear?" And which is bold choice, Cotton. You know what I mean? But
Better be strapped.
yeah, no kidding. And they were told where they could go, potentially see a bear, right? With caution, go, and here's where you may find a bear. Well, what they told David Paulides is that they spotted what looked like a bear running on two legs, holding a small child. Okay, and the father, and this was roughly, they again didn't know that Dennis was missing. Okay, they just were out there coincidentally. This incident occurred an hour after Dennis went missing. Okay, and the father says, in recalling, that stated that a bear that did not seem to act like a bear, but instead was running on two legs, dodging between trees, and had more of human-like movement and gait. Further stated it appeared more like a large person covered in hair than a bear, but that he had no other idea what it could have been at the time, right? It was reported to park rangers, but at the time they didn't do anything about or with that information because they just kind of thought that they were seeing things, or what they saw wasn't exactly what they saw because it was from a distance. Anyway, so to me, here we go, right? So what does that sound like to you, right? And you look at some of these other cases where there's children involved, and they talk about, oh, well, the bear came into the tent and it picked up my little brother and walked out with him, right? A bear isn't going to do that. They're not going to pick him up and walk away with him on two legs. Bear do walk on two legs sometimes, okay?
They don't run on two legs.
No, not like that. Not over long distances. Not running like a person. Not dodging.
And they don't have the ability. They don't have the ability to carry something in their paws, like.
Especially if, let's just say, and I don't know if Dennis was conscious at this point, right, when he was seen, or if that was Dennis, right? We have to speculate. You would think you'd be kicking and screaming, you know what I mean? And you're terrified for your life. You just got taken away, from your family, right? But yeah,
unless Bigfoot just has a very nurturing aura to him.
No, and it's odd that you say that. There's so many of these cases. First off, I just want to say that there's no way to have one conversation about them. We'd be here for 12 hours, And in this, maybe we decide we do another Missing 411 episode to talk about some of these other cases because there are plenty of them. But
maybe
the thing
411 episodes.
Yeah, and but a lot of them have stuff in them that sounds and descriptions that sound like what people and how people describe Bigfoot. And it's not just adults, it's children too, and which I think is really strange because if you've got a small child, in some of these cases you've got kids that are still single digits, there's no reason for them to lie and make up a story like that, aside from the kids that young, they lie about eating their food. They lie about what they just did in front of you, right? I didn't throw that or whatever, They don't make up elaborate stories about giant ape-like creatures coming into the tent and taking their sibling, right? And so, and of course, what are they going to call it, right? In this one incident, right? The one I'm referring to is the little girl described a bear coming into the tent. So, of course, she's not going to say, oh, Bigfoot came into the tent. What?
Yeah, she doesn't know what Bigfoot is.
Exactly. In her brain, this is a bear because even my kid, like I said, he's not even 2, can recognize a bear. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's from some of his books. And so there's all these instances that, they sound like Bigfoot. And when we did the Zack Attack episode, I did that reel that has that clip from the Sierra Nevada Club where they recorded what they said were Bigfoots. And again, that's recorded in a national park. And so this tied into this theory, essentially, that, and some of the theories are more grandiose than others, but essentially that the National Park Service exists to hide the fact that there are cryptid creatures in the national parks and that's where they live and that's why it's protected land and all that stuff. And do I really think that's why the National Park Service exists? No, I don't think the National Park Service exists to mask the fact that there are cryptids out there. Do I think, though, that there are National Park Service rangers and forest rangers that are told, hey, if something like this comes up that, you're not supposed to talk about it? Yes, because there have been park rangers that have come out and said that before. I have a friend, I'm not going to say his name, but he works for the Forest Service. And he 100% will tell you that there have been instances where he's been told, hey, if somebody asks about that, you need to attribute that to a bear or whatever. And what's the purpose? What's the need? You don't want to draw negative attention. I mean, if you're trying to keep people from being too afraid to come back to the park, I think it's just as scary to say there's a grizzly bear over here as there is a Bigfoot. And I'll say this, having been to Glacier National Park a ton of times, signs that there are grizzlies that were seen here 10 hours ago do not stop people from going down this trail and getting that selfie at the end. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
they'll do it anyway. You know what I mean? So this whole theory of, oh, well, it's, try to stop people, dissuade people from coming in. Like, you don't need to come up with an elaborate story to do that. And even then, people don't listen. But the thing is, like with this, is I do. Like, I think that that's, and you can call it what you want or call me what you want, but I feel like that is a plausible solution, is that there's some sort of cryptid or interdimensional Bigfoot, right, that exists, and this happens to, because there's too many instances, and the ones involving kids to me lend a lot of credence to it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
even for adults, a lot of adults that want to sit there and say they have these Bigfoot stories. Some of them don't care, and some people do it just for, the attention. But there are a lot of credible adults that say, and then there's adults in my life that say they've had Bigfoot experiences, and you're really only inviting negativity from the large portion of people, whether it's passive negativity or it's active, hey, that's stupid, or you're
Mm-hmm.
lying negativity. You know what I mean? Unless you're somebody like me or you who's going to sit there and listen with interest and not judge. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But this one to me sounds like some sort of Bigfoot.
Yeah, for sure. And to kind of go off what you're saying about kids, like, yeah, with the bear things, I know with that specific story of where the the sister saw her brother get taken away by the
Mm-hmm.
bear or
Yeah.
Bigfoot or whatever, her
Yeah.
story has never changed. It's
Mm-hmm.
been the same every time, and even as she's aged. And if I remember correctly, they never found the boy. So like he's
Right.
still missing too. There's no body,
Right.
there's no nothing about it. And like she's now like a teenager, but her story is never changed. It's never wavered. She was put on polygraphs, like all of that. And yeah, on the polygraph, if they ask, "Do you think it was Bigfoot?" and if she says yes, then it comes up as like a lie. But if you ask her, "Do you think it was a bear?" she goes yes because that's what she thought it was at the time. So that's going to be her reality. But um, it's the same thing. Like a lot of kids that experience this stuff. Um, like we were talking the other day, and I was telling you a story. This isn't one of the ones I had, and I can't remember the exact specifics, but there was a child who went missing um, near like a swamp, like a swampy area,
Mm-hmm.
and the kid was found like 2 days later in a part of the swamp that would be impossible for this child to get to,
Okay.
and it was the kid was found while like peeking behind a tree like this at like rescue
Mm.
people.
Yeah.
And when the rescuers found the kid, we're like, "Why are you hiding from us? Like we've been looking forever for you." The kid explained that, "Well, that's what the other people were doing." Um, and they're like, "What? What are you talking about?" And the kid in the interviews, well after the fact, and still probably to this day, if you ask this kid, who's probably an adult now, is they were lured out because there was a creature or something sneaking behind trees like this and took them away and like guided them somewhere. And the kid said that they never went through a swamp or a lake or anything. It was like a weird foresty area, and there was a lot of these creatures all behind trees. And this one big creature like took him through this and then like
Wow.
left him somewhere and told the kid like stay here, you'll be safe, and then like also left. And the kid said the other creatures kept looking behind trees, and so he was like really scared. And then finally the rescuers found him, and then everything was okay. But like that story never changed, and nothing made sense about the kid getting to where the kid got, how they could get there. It There's just so many weird things. It's speculated that Bigfoot helped this kid that was the larger creature, and that the other creatures are like enemies of Bigfoot or some other type of cryptid. Um, but
Dude,
who knows? It kind of
cryptid
gets into the
wars.
idea of like interdimensional, right? Where we joke interdimensional Bigfoot, but there's a running theory that
Yeah,
he can travel, or she or it can travel through dimensions, and
yeah.
it can take things with it. And perhaps maybe the other creatures were trying to pull the kid. Bigfoot happened to be noticed it or saw it and just protected it while I went through this weird dimension, and then told it like stay here because that was like maybe a place it can like go back through. Um, and that kind of goes into so this goes into my next person. Um, his
If
name
you
is
don't mind, real
Danny.
quick, I'll say
Yeah.
about what you were saying is that
Hmm.
two things, right? There's another story, and I'll just say it really fast. That
Yeah.
again, a little girl gets taken from her family, and when she's recovered alive, she talks about a mama bear taking care of her, and she uses that phrase "mama bear." You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And again, it could be a Bigfoot taking care of this child, right? Making sure that they, thinking, oh, well, here's this small child or small, being that I need to take care of, and I take care of it, and I offer it food and offer the things I would offer my, my offspring or whatever.
Hmm.
And then the other thing too, like you said with the interdimensional Bigfoot thing, right? Is that's how people say that it is able to travel, and disappear, and not get found, is that it exists on the other side of this veil between ours and another dimension. And that's
Hmm.
why you don't ever find, a body, or you don't ever find, it when you go looking for it in the woods. And the other part with it too, like when you were talking about, like peeking from behind the trees, is there's another theory with this that I think makes a lot of sense too and could account. And there doesn't need to be one explanation. I want to preface this
Yeah.
and say there doesn't need to be one explanation for all of these cases. They're just odd, okay? And
Yeah.
we're not trying to solve it, okay? But the other thing is feral people, right? It's people that live out in the woods, and they are 100% wild, okay? But they are human beings, okay?
Hmm.
And that's who's taking these people, these kids, or dispatching these people, right? Killing them.
Hmm.
And I don't know, maybe if you're a feral person, you watch enough campers fold their clothes or set their stuff down or whatever, and you think, well, I'm again, like putting yourself in the mind of a feral person, right? You know, you're avoiding all other human contact, okay? And you learn to avoid human contact because you live in a national park and you see people, with frequency, right?
Yeah.
And they're looking for this person. So what do? You go into hiding, okay? Because there's sweeping, there's dogs, there's people walking in line doing strip and grid searches and all this stuff. Then you know where to hide so you're not found. And then when they stop coming into that area, you go and put all the shit back. You know what I mean? Well, that's where they were. You know what I mean? And you go and you
Hmm.
put it all back, and then you disappear again, right? So the idea that there's these wild human beings, these feral people that live out in the national parks, and that again is another thing that supposedly the National Park Service and the Forest Service, they're covering up, or the fact that these feral people exist, is another, to me, plausible theory about why this stuff happens, and then
Hmm.
explains it fairly well to me.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The feral people's kind of interesting because like they could like a lot of these missing people happen near caves, so they could like be living in caves and they're
Yeah,
just insane and they haven't been around a whole like civilization stuff like that, and they don't necessarily have to be like your crazy great uncle who just went out in the woods. These feral people can be like just a sect of individuals, humanoids that have like been around before we ever came and found the new world. They could be like, and it could be like the Wendigo or the other Native American um, creatures because you hear a lot of like Native American stories where they're like, don't go in these areas at these times, stuff like that,
right.
because maybe they knew that there was like a feral, insane humanoid that was
Yeah,
not to be messed with at certain times and stuff
yeah.
like that. So.
I know I've heard and read a lot of these are people will explain them with the Wendigo, or I know you're
Hmm.
not supposed to like say it, but the flesh pedestrians, right? Uh,
Hmm.
that's accounting for these people going missing, and this little kid Dennis, um, he went missing Smoky Mountain National Park, which is in Appalachia, which
Mm.
Appalachia, however you say it, which accounts for some of this lore, right? With skinwalkers, with wendigos, right? And so, and it just to me, there's not just a human element involved in some of this stuff, and it could be feral people, it could be interdimensional Bigfoot, it could be some you know
Mm.
supernatural explanation.
The Skinwalker things, all like those ones creep me out a lot because uh, a lot of the stories about it is that like a Skinwalker will like pretend to be hurt. They'll be like,
Yeah.
"Help, help me!
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you come help me? Like, hey, come over here!" And then you
Right.
get over there and they're like, it eats you or kills you, or whatever. And then you get like the joke videos where obviously it's like not real, but like
Mm-hmm.
there are some videos where you're like, okay, that's doesn't like it sounds like someone asking for help, but it doesn't sound right. Like
Yeah.
it sounds off, and you're like, uh,
Well,
okay,
so
don't go there.
yeah, I'll say this, man. Like a lot of that stuff is very popular on social media, and but my grandmother is from West Virginia, and she's since passed. But a lot of this stuff that she had in her house, growing up, I've learned because she never told me about it. You know what I mean? But like, broomsticks and stuff like that, old broom handles or brooms, and not having a mat on the front of the house or right in the front door, stuff like that. That these are
Mm,
all things that people avoid doing because they're trying not to invite something in, or they know that having the broom by the door keeps stuff out. You know what I mean? And you
mm,
closing the shades at night, which I do anyway, because like I don't like looking at this blackness and not being because you can't tell with the light from the inside if something's looking in at
mm.
you, so it gives me the willies, you know what I mean? But like
Same.
that's if you live out in the, and I would too, no matter what set of mountains or the forest I lived in, would do it anyway.
Mm,
But that's like a thing, in the Appalachian Mountains. If you live out there, you're from that area, you close the windows up at night, you pull the shades, and if you hear something call your name, no, you didn't, right? Or don't go whistle into the dark, which I know is not just an Appalachian thing, it's a Native American thing too, is to not whistle into the dark, because that is supposed to, inviting something, that you don't want to be around come down on you, basically. So there's all this stuff, and it's not even just the national parks in general, it's the forest, because even not to get too far off topic, but like living in Europe as much as I have my whole life, Germany specifically, and that area, Germany is extremely wooded. Where I used to live is close to the Black Forest, and they have a lot of similar lore to what Americans do too, and Native Americans do as well. So, and it all has to do with keeping you safe in the woods from supernatural creatures and supernatural elements. So,
yeah, for sure. Sorry, I was muted. My little cat box was making noise. I have an automated cat box just off topic, and it moves. It makes noises whenever Kuma goes to the bathroom. So, but
thanks,
yeah,
Kuma.
yeah. Thanks a lot, Kuma. But yeah, it all those things are just kind of super interesting to me. It almost makes me want to like go out into the woods and try to like find them or seek them out. But then I'm also worried that I would go out there and then I would fall into an interdimensional rift and then I'd be gone forever.
It's the missing
So
412.
dang it. Yeah, my next guy here, this guy went missing and was found, so it is a good
Mm-hmm.
story.
Okay.
But it's just strange as the first one. It's not as long. It's not going to be 14 months missing. But it's very strange and it's
Oh yeah, this
recent.
is the one you said that was reference to the first one.
Yes, yes. So
Okay,
this
I'm
guy's
ready.
name was Danny Philippidis, I think.
Okay.
Why do they all have to have weird names? Why can't Zach Smith just go missing? Anyways, um,
You
in
said you were gonna
February,
go do it.
well,
Get
maybe
on
in
it,
the next
bro.
411 we'll be talking
Part
about me
two.
going missing.
It'll
Yeah.
be 412.
In February of 2018, Danny Philippidis was on a ski trip with his friends in upstate New York, like in the Adirondacks area.
Mm-hmm.
It was around 2 p.m. They had been skiing for hours,
Mm-hmm.
and they were getting ready to go back to the lodge. Um, Danny said that he wanted to go one more run down the mountain before the little break at 4. And so his friends were like, okay. go down the mountain and be good to go. Now this was at like an actual like ski lodge, so he got on the lift
Mm-hmm.
and it took him back up, and there's other people on the lift,
Mm-hmm.
and he went up to the top, right? And his buddies were just sitting in the lodge waiting for him to come back down. Eventually gets to like 6, 7 o'clock, and they're like, "What the heck? Where is this guy?" So they tried calling him because he had his phone with him. They tried texting him. Nothing was going through. Um, just seemed really strange. So then they were like, "Hey, we haven't seen him for a while. He went up the mountain. We need to search for him." So they immediately, within like 6 hours of him going missing, the whole area had about 130 people searching the whole mountain for him, trying to find him. Okay. Uh, Never found him on the mountain because he wasn't even in New York anymore. 6 days later, Danny's
Damn.
wife received a phone call
Mm-hmm.
from his phone. Okay.
Okay.
Uh, it was very muffled and it was very staticky,
Okay.
but she could tell it was Danny's voice. And she
Mm.
said that he was very incoherent and confused, and he kept saying that they're chasing him.
That's
Um,
creepy as hell, dude.
yes. And so and then he hung up the phone. Like there wasn't much communication between him and his wife. The wife immediately called the police. It was like he just called me. Can we trace the phone? Da 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 da. So
Yeah.
they tried to trace the phone and they still couldn't find it. And they'd done this before. They tried to trace his phone and it still was untraceable. They couldn't find it. Um, and so he was just kind of still missing. Well, about 3 days after that phone call, he came out of the woods in near Sacramento, California. He was just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and he walked out of the woods. So he went from New York to California, 3,000 miles away, in about like 7, 8 days, which is 100% plausible. You could hop on a plane, you could get there, all type of stuff.
Sure.
Um, but he was still wearing all his ski stuff. Okay. So he walked out of the woods or out of like a field or whatever, and he was still wearing all his ski stuff that he was had back in New York, sweating profusely, obviously, because it's hot. He had his phone. He had all his stuff that he had when he went missing, and he walked up to someone and was like asking him like where was he because he didn't know where he was, and they're like, dude, you're like outside Sacramento, California. And he was like, "Oh my God!" So then he called the cops immediately, and he told them that he was missing and that he didn't know where he was. And he needed help, and then they came and picked him up, and they took him back home. They interviewed him. They asked him like, "Where you been? What's going on?" And the only thing he remembered from the time was that these creatures were chasing him, and he was just running away.
Did he have a
There is
description of these creatures?
He did not. He just said he felt them, and
What?
he just kept trying to run away. Um, What's interesting is there is no airline travel of him going from New York to California. There was no purchases on. He had his wallet and everything with him still, but there was no purchase with any of his cards. He still had the
Okay.
same amount of cash that he had when he left, when he disappeared in New York.
Mm-hmm.
The cops investigated, like, did he take a bus? There was no bus tickets. Did he take an Uber? No Uber. There was no train. There was nothing. Um, they even tried looking at like CCT footage at like the lodge or whatever. There was no footage of him leaving the lodge at any time, at least within a reasonable amount to when he could get to California. So this man Danny was in the hills at a ski lodge in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. Disappeared, showed up 3,000 miles away about a week later, still wearing all his same stuff, having no idea what happened other than that he was being chased by weird entities.
Well, that's
And he,
extremely creepy.
and he somehow called his wife in the middle of this with a very
From the other
staticky
side.
phone call, freaking out. And they couldn't trace his phone ever.
I wonder if, well, I mean, I'm sure there was, but like if there was a log of that call, you know what I mean? Like there would have been on her phone, I guess, if it was cell phones. But dude,
Yeah,
that is extremely creepy. Like they just, again, like this is in my brain an interdimensional kind of thing. You know, you
it's exactly what I think it is.
fell into some sort of time slip and or whatever, and you wound up in California. And again, you know, there's a ton of cases out there that you can go find that aren't missing 411 cases, but they are cases of people who have disappeared, and they've been found other places, or their family members know they disappeared. Like a long time ago, I read a story about a guy who went missing in his cornfield, and for the rest of his daughter's life, like he was never found again. But they told officials that, and people, that they could go out into the cornfield sometimes and have a conversation with him, and that he told them that he was there, that he fell. All he felt was this sensation of falling through the ground, and then he was somewhere else, and that every once in a while, he could come back there and talk to them, but that he did not know how to get back. And that, to me, that thought is altogether just terrifying, because you're, especially if you can see the people on the other side, right? And if you're, my brain immediately goes to Stranger Things, right, with the Upside Down, and it's not the same, it's different. It's similar, but it's different, right? And if you're being chased by something in another dimension like that, that's being chased in general is going to elicit terror for sure, right? But interdimensional terror, it sounds a lot worse, and just that is really, really scary to me. Being just one day, dude, you're like, I'm going to go do this last run, or I'm going to go for a run or whatever. And then you wind up on the other side, somewhere, and, it makes me think of. I want to I want to tell you about the Kelly Hopkinsville thing, but I want to finish talking about these people first. The other ones that have gone missing. I think I'm just going to do one more, because I picked several to talk about. And if we end up talking about the others, we can. But again, this one this was also on the Missing 411 documentary, but. This is the Jared Atadero case. Again, another kid. This happened in 1999, Rocky Mountain National Park. The father was out with a group of people. It was like a Christian singles group, right? And they had kids, and they went, I guess, out on this like retreat out in the woods. And it to me is like
do some soaking.
I don't. Yeah, sure. That's Mormons, isn't it? But
It is, yeah.
no, yeah. But and if they've got kids, they're single parents. They weren't soaking, right? But anyway,
could be.
Yeah. The group asked if the kids wanted to go to a hatchery, like a fish hatchery. And Jared wanted to go, and the dad didn't want to go, but the other parents in the group said they would take him and they'd look after him and all that stuff. And he agreed to let the kid go. And they didn't just go to the hatchery, right? They decided that they were going to go on a hike. They didn't tell. This was there were cell phones in 1999, but it wasn't everybody who had them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not like today. You couldn't
it's like a giant Nokia that was
right.
indestructible.
You weren't just going to send a text or make a quick call or whatever. But anyway, they went on a hike, and I guess they split up into a couple different groups. Some of the kids that were probably younger and could travel a little bit slower versus a group with kids that were a little bit older and could travel a little faster, right? And they were going to go on the same hike, and I guess Jared kind of got in front of the group, and he was within eye shot, and eventually he actually ended up talking to two fishermen, but the fishermen didn't think anything of it because they could see the group that he was with. They said it's a very specific number, but they told the police about 80 feet away from the group of the other kids and adults, so they didn't really think anything of it. But Jared eventually got too far ahead of the group, and essentially the last thing they heard was what they described as a playful scream or laugh, as if Jared was playing a game of tag with someone and got tagged and made like that excited like noise, like, oh, you got me, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
They searched for him for about an hour, didn't find him, made the decision to leave the area, go tell Jared's dad that he was missing, right? Rightfully, the dad was pissed off, drove his truck out to where it was. He searched for a little bit and then decided he needed to call the police. Called the police. They went out and searched for him. Again, another adverse weather event happened, prevented them from initially going out and searching for Jared. near another body of water. Like I said, there were fishermen. There was a river by there. So that, of course, was one of the things that they assumed, is that maybe he had gotten into the water, drowned or whatever. So of course they did what they do. They dragged the water, didn't find anything. They checked upstream, all that stuff. But another thing with this too is they brought a team of dogs out, and because of the seriousness of it being a child, they found a group, a guy who had trained dogs specifically for searching for people, and they brought those dogs in. Right, those dogs have like extra special training, I guess, and they weren't even able to find Jared. No scent was picked up for him either, right, from these dogs. But 4 years later, in that area again where it had been searched 4 years, right? Two hikers on the Big South Trail found Jared's clothing 550 feet from the last place that he was seen. And you can go and you can Google Jared Adadero's clothing, okay? And the pants and stuff are pretty torn up, but it does not look. The rest of it is very intact. His shoes, his shirt, the little jacket he was wearing. It does not look like it was torn up by a mountain lion. They did find tracks for mountain lions in that area when he went missing, but there was no other evidence that he was taken by a mountain lion. Okay. Anyway, so they found his clothes 550 feet away from where he was last seen. Okay, which is not that far at all, 550 feet.
No, if they searched the whole area, I feel like they would have like came
Right.
across it.
And a few months later, skull fragments from the top of the skull and a single tooth were found in a crevice of a boulder field 180 feet from where the clothes were found. Okay, and these were all areas that had been searched before, right? So again, right, finding the remains in the crevice, right? Could an animal have hidden the food there for later? Animals do that, yes. But all this other stuff, right? It just doesn't make any sense, right? And here's another story. I just real quick touch on it. Corey Fay, 17 years old, 1991, Badger Creek, Oregon, went elk hunting with a friend and the friend's dad. They split up again. They were only supposed to be separated for an hour. Corey never came back. There was a 10-day search. Corey had a bag with supplies. He had a rifle, all this stuff. The FBI was called in to search for him. He's a minor that made a note of that. But on December of 1992, right, almost a full year, it is a year after he was missing, two hunters found his backpack and rifle 10 miles away from where he was last seen. His jacket was found a mile away from that point on a ridge at 6.5 thousand feet elevation. And with that stuff, they found another skull fragment again and another single tooth, okay? And they said that there was no way in November in Oregon, in that area, that Corey would have been able to trek that far, because where he was going, he would have been in waist-deep snow the whole time. And it would be even difficult for a large animal like a mountain lion or a bear to drag, something this as big as a 17-year-old person, right? A 17-year-old guy, man, essentially, and drag him and leave him in that area. But again, so the skull cap, right, the top of the skull, a single tooth, all these different things, right, that the going missing and getting found again thing, and had that experience, that sounds terrifying. But why? I just don't. What is up with the similarities in this? You know what I mean? And there's another story you can find too, where this guy goes missing, and then they search the area, and then again these hikers find this dude's pants, okay, draped over a log. They're coming out of the legs, individual legs of the pants are socks, okay? Like somebody set the socks up to come out, okay? But the bones are inside the pant legs and the socks, okay? Right.
What?
And yes. And it looks set up, like somebody set this up, okay? And that's what's creepy to me, is what is the point of this if not to taunt, or you just genuinely do not understand human beings or what, and you think you're doing something that you're not doing. You know what I mean? You think you're doing a good deed and setting it up so somebody will find it, but just sending, it's not, your message ain't getting across, whatever you are, and but we're laughing, but this is It is. It's so fucking scary and weird,
That's
man.
just
Like
strange.
it is, dude. And it you know, these books. You get if you do you know who George Knapp is?
Mm-mm.
So he's actually he is a journalist and like a news broadcaster, but he also is very well known for you know his I guess you could say forays into the paranormal, and he's on been on Coast to Coast Radio. He also has a podcast now with
Jose.
dude. I know I love Coast to Coast with Jeremy Corbell. But anyway, he said those books will make you be way more aware in the woods, right? And but
Mm.
even then, it doesn't even sound like being aware is going to help you out if you're all of a sudden you go from skiing to running for your life from interdimensional beings. It just
Interdimensional
yeah,
Bigfoot.
yeah. And so, I'll say this real fast. Like these things happening where they happen, I've in all these cases, I found ones like I said that specifically have these characteristics that are all tied together. How it doesn't make any sense to me. None of this stuff. It's just really
So
weird.
my running theory, and this is what makes the most sense to me, is I do believe it has to be something like interdimensional. Like you fall into a rift
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. And my idea behind this is the reason why it happens out in like national parks or like forested areas is they tend to be areas that are less like there's not like power lines, there's not like a lot of activity. It's a
Mm-hmm.
calm area. And I'm just wondering, or I guess I'm hypothetically thinking that because it's an area that is calm, it's probably more in tune with nature, the earth, a whole bunch of other stuff, that maybe those areas just have the ability to kind of pass through, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar to where you have like Buddhists, Buddhist monks.
Mm-hmm.
They believe that like the temple that they're in, they can't be like loud. They got to be real respectful, quiet, nice, all that type of stuff. And it
Right.
allows like spirits to come to that area more often and that type of stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're in New York City, you're probably not going to be able to experience too many spirits because it's like way too loud, it's too rambunctious, it's too much activity, too
Well,
much
in
electricity.
Ghostbusters, though,
Yeah. What were you gonna say?
I said
Ghostbuster?
in
Oh.
Ghostbusters, though, yeah,
Yeah, when you got the giant Michelin man or what the puff walking
yeah, Stay
around.
Puft Marshmallow Man, and then in
Yeah.
Ghostbusters 2, you had the Statue of Liberty. Just saying,
Okay. Those are authentic documentaries.
they
But
are.
the that's my idea is that you go through some type of like interdimensional like rift and maybe you're like still on like you can still see our dimension,
Yeah.
but like you can't quite interact with it. And
Mm-hmm.
what made me really think about this is I was watching a show on Netflix with my wife. It's called like I Wish I Would Have Told You 100 million times. It's a Japanese show, and
Okay.
it's about this guy who like goes missing, and from his perspective, he's like still on Earth, but he can't communicate with anyone and he's like walking through people and no one knows that he's there. And he's like, what the heck? What is going on?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like another guy who can like see him and can like be the mediator or whatever. Like you can like talk for him and stuff like that. Um, but and I'm not gonna spoil it. It's a great show. You should just everyone listening should just go watch it because it's actually a pretty good show. It's like 10 episodes, one season. It's
Mm-hmm.
really nice. But he's like freaking out. He's like stuck in his dimension. And he's like trying to communicate with his like girlfriend and like tell her like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I'm gone. I love you. Like, move on." That type of stuff. But like that's what I think happens maybe to these people. They just fall into something. So like the guy who went from New York to California, he fell into some rift. Didn't realize
Yeah.
where he was. He's being chased by something in this other dimension. He's like freaking out. And then he just somehow falls out of the rift in California. Like he just
Mm-hmm.
happens to get out. Maybe it's also what happened with the other dude who was gone for 14 months. He falls into a rift and then just pops out later. And I'm wondering if maybe all these missing people, they just fall into a rift. And my idea is like how you find like clothes or you find items from them after you've searched an area is in the show I watched,
Yeah.
things that were his because he had like an attachment to it, he could manipulate them like in the show. So I'm wondering if like if you went missing with your like you fell into a rift, maybe your clothes don't go with you or something or like or I don't know, but like you can manipulate your clothes and then maybe you can leave them behind. Maybe that's why they're folded up nice because like you're trying to like signal to people like, hey, I'm here. Like,
A folded pair of pants on a log in the middle of the woods does not fit.
yeah, it doesn't. It's like, hey, I exist still. Please help me. Like I can
Mm-hmm.
see you, but you can't see
Right.
me. If this whole
Right.
type of thing. Or like you just said, like with the guy with like the bones were still in the legs and the socks. Like,
Yeah. And they never
what
found the
if
torso.
what if he like was so far? Like, what if you're in the rift too long and like your body like does pass over, like your spirit stays in the rift, but your body goes back to where it naturally is supposed to be.
It's
I
like
like
Marty McFly disappearing on stage playing the guitar. Right.
yeah, like maybe it's something similar, and so like he put his clothes there or something, or maybe that's where he fell. He fell into the rift while sitting on that log,
That's true.
and then now that his physical entity, because it's been so long, is now just reappearing in that position where he fell through the rift, but his spiritual entity is like gone. It
Or maybe like maybe like all of him, he sat down, all of him fell through, and then only half of him came back, which is why only half of him was there.
that could be it too.
Yeah.
Like, because if they can come in and out, and it's just it'd be interesting because you have people who do disappear for a long time and then just show back up. And then
Yeah.
if it was interdimensional, maybe they could explain like why you don't remember a lot of it because like it just doesn't make sense to you
Well, it's
and
like
like you just can't think of it.
so there. This also is made me think of another case that's very popular, and there's a movie made about it. But the Travis Walton disappearance, the UFO case. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so there's a movie. You can go watch it. It's pretty creepy. It's really good. This is a true story. Travis Walton was a logger. This is in Arizona. He and some friends were leaving, or coworkers, I guess, friends, whatever you want to call them, were leaving the woods at night after working all day. And essentially, this is what their story is, that they saw a light. It was following them down this mountain road, and they were hauling ass going way too fast, trying to avoid it because it was scaring them. Eventually, I don't recall if like the truck died or they just stopped because they knew they couldn't get away from it anymore. But Travis got out of the truck, walked towards this, glowing object, okay? And according to everybody else, he got taken up into it, okay? And
Disappeared.
there was this investigation. They got accused of murder. They thought that he was killed. They thought that his friends killed him. They all took polygraph. They had somebody come in to give them all a polygraph test, which they all passed. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then randomly one night, from a payphone some distance away from where he was from, he called his house, okay, and was terrified, and they drove out, and they had to like drive up and down the highway to find which like payphone he was at. And I want to say it was his brother and his wife who was looking for him. But basically, he had been missing for however long. Okay, it was long enough period
Mm-hmm.
of time where there was an active investigation, and they were, had arrested and charged like his friends with his disappearance and murder. Okay, and he came back, and of course, it vindicated their story about what happened. Okay, and he recalls what happened to him, right? He will tell, and it's in the movie. It's called Fire in the Sky, is what the movie is called. And I recommend it to anybody. I'll say this up front: it's a pretty creepy movie, especially if this sort of thing causes you distress. Maybe don't watch it. But the scenes with him on this spacecraft with these aliens, right, are pretty intense because they do like these experiments on him, like they shove a needle in his eye, stuff like that. Just saying, like all this really terrible stuff. But he was missing for a long time, and they did not know where he was. But in his case, according to him, he was abducted by a UFO, abducted by aliens, right? But Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky. A very interesting case. Like I said, the police investigated his disappearance and everything, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that all happened, and
Well,
um,
there is the idea to like or the theory that like aliens and UFOs, like specifically like near the Bermuda Triangle and stuff, like they can pass through dimensional rifts as well. Like they go
yeah,
somewhere else,
that's
and
kind
that could
of
explain it too. Like if
yep.
they have the technology to pass through, and for all we know, the aliens we see could just be like super advanced humans from another dimension on our
Yeah,
Earth, just
yeah,
going to like a different Earth. Like, there's so many crazy theories and rabbit holes we could go down with this, but I
yeah.
still
No,
do think that it's more of a you falling into a different dimension, and
mm-hmm.
some of them come back, others do not.
Yeah.
Um, and it's
I
just
kind
kind of
of
how that's why I think it is.
right. I don't think, like I said before, I don't think there's one explanation. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think that they're national parks, heavily wooded areas, right? Maine, for instance, apparently is the state that has the most UFO sightings out of any of the states, right? Alaska is another one, and so again,
Maine
these are
also has a
all.
ton of
What's that?
Maine, I think, has like the most lakes, like in the
Oh, okay. Right. Well,
like
there
North
you go.
America or
Right.
something. Yeah, water
Right.
source.
And a lot of these states that have a lot of wide open space without humans, it's just all this wilderness where people just don't live. They have all these really crazy sightings, and these incidents, they have a high volume of them, and with I don't think there's just one explanation. I think some of it you can attribute to UFOs. Some of it you can attribute to these slips in time and space where you wind up on the other side of some dimension, or there
Hmm.
could be feral people, because there are other cases, these missing 411 cases, and not just missing 411 cases. There's like reports of people seeing like humans living out in the woods. You know what I mean? And there are cases throughout history of people coming in contact with human beings that you didn't know they lived, arboreally wild out in the trees, and but the one thing we talked about at the beginning that I really want to talk about, I find extremely interesting, is the cave system thing when these people going missing, and it is the perfect way to disappear. Whether you're an animal or you're a feral being, human, or you're a Bigfoot or whatever, is to disappear into these cave systems. And if that's where you live and that's where you grew up, you know what the cave system is like. You know what I mean? These people that go spelunking and all that shit. Like the whatever, man, that's not my bag. Like I'll go into like some of these like well-known caverns where a person is leading you, and there's rooms and there's stairs, and you can get in and out. But like these people that go into these wild cave systems, it's like
Mm-mm.
that is like hell no. Especially cave divers. Like this is like the worst combo ever. I don't understand how anybody puts themselves through that. Like just the thought of it makes me claustrophobic. But
Hmm.
anyway, so the Kelly Hopkinsville incident. Okay, this happened. I want to say it was in like the 1940s. I'd have to look specifically, but basically, this family, they lived out in the woods basically, and they started to get attacked at night by these creatures essentially, and they described them as they had these big ears and big eyes, and basically called it, you can see the newspaper article that was
Hmm.
written about them called them goblins. Okay, and they supposedly got into, they started shooting at them when they like surrounded the house, and they actually escaped the house. Supposedly, this is their story. Drove to the police station, brought the cops back. The cops documented the fact that the house was shot up, right? And so this whole incident was documented and has been attributed, as either some sort of like alien, group, right, or
Hmm.
mythical creatures that live out there in Appalachia, right? Because
Hmm.
Kelly Hopkinsville is in Kentucky, okay, and there is a documentary that you can go watch. It's called Hellier, and it documents this incident in Kelly Hopkinsville, but supposedly happening again, like within the past 10 years. Okay. And essentially what
Hmm.
happens is I don't remember his name, but he's reached out to from this guy who says that him and his daughter, they live out in this house kind of off the beaten path, and they're having these experiences where his daughter says she was seeing, something outside at night. It would take her bike out of the garage and leave it out in the yard, and he would come to the window and she would see it and all this stuff, and like he reached out to him asking for help. And this goes down all these crazy rabbit holes, like this documentary. I recommend it. It's not for everybody. It can be kind of slow at times. You have to really have an interest in this stuff. Like I said, it's kind of a slow burn, but it's good. And, it's got Mothman tied into it, a lot of synchronicity. But one of the aspects of this show that I found really interesting is they actually go out and they try to find this person, because like the emails just stop and then they start up again and there's all these really weird clues, but they go out to where this happened, okay? And they're talking to these people and they keep going around and they're like asking these random people they come up to and they're like, "Hey, have you ever had anything weird happen to you out here?" And everybody is saying no, they've never had anything weird or whatever. By chance, he just decides, him and his girlfriend, like they're gonna explain to somebody at this like rural gas station why they're out there and what happened. And the dude's like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like that's how we're taught about not wandering off into the woods." And they're like, "What do you mean?" And they go into this whole explanation about, as a kid, they tell you to stay away from the caves, to stay away from creek beds, especially dried up creek beds, and to stay away from, if you hear your name calling off, call it off into the distance, into the woods, don't go towards it. Or if you see creatures in the woods, like trying to get your attention, as crazy as that sounds, don't go
Mm-hmm.
towards it. And that, you'll disappear and mommy and daddy will never see you again, basically. And so when they start talking to more people again, they start explaining that, and they're like, "Oh yeah, well that's just, that's normal. You asked me, like, have I seen anything weird? Like that's just part of our culture here." And it's like, well, that's
Yeah.
kind of freaking wild that you're asking these people, "Have you seen anything weird?" And that's not strange to them. But essentially, there's this whole plot basically about how like these things exist. Damn, I got like hair in my mouth. Sorry, everybody. They exist, and there's this story about how this family that lived out in the woods, tried to convince another family to help them out by going into these caves and killing off these creatures. And the other family decided that they were going to help, and then changed their mind. So this guy, he decided he was going to blast this cave entrance with dynamite, and I guess he did. And supposedly it's what caused like this incident, or excuse me, caused this issue with these goblins or whatever it is you want to call them that live out in the woods and in the cave system. But the whole impetus behind this was that they kidnapped people in the woods, okay, and took them away. You never saw them again. But the thing is, this is the Mammoth Cave system specifically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the documentary, they have all these really high profile missing cases and these people they talk to, and all of these missing cases, they are right along these entrances into the Mammoth Cave system. And the Mammoth Cave system is connected for a long across multiple states, right, all underground. And if you have an interest in watching it, I don't want to spoil it for you, but the Pokemon reference I was talking about is the Pokemon Sableye. The Japanese supposedly have this, they know about the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, and they created a Pokemon called Sableye they created it off the description of what the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins look like. So if you want to go look it up and Google, the Pokemon Sableye, or what Sableye looks like, that is supposedly the description of what these goblins look like, which is kind of wild when you look them up. Were you just Googling him?
Yeah, I was trying to Google it or whatever.
Yeah,
What was it again? A
Sableye.
s- Sable Eye?
Mm-hmm.
Sable Eye Pokemon.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. But the Japanese, that they designed that Pokemon, they drew him as a Kelly Hopkinsville goblin. How odd that is that the Japanese are familiar with this story, but most Americans have never even heard of it.
I
And
haven't.
yeah, I implore a lot of you, everybody, like go look into it. It's pretty wild, but it is, again, the Mammoth Cave system is a national park. The Appalachian Mountains have a lot of wilderness, and that's how apparently a group of people in the United States are taught as children to stay away from the caves, because there's these creatures that will try to coax you in. And the other thing too is, like, some of these people that say that they've had incidents with these creatures will tell you that they kind of lose time and they feel lulled into a sense of false security, and they start wandering off, and these dry creek beds come into account. and
Hmm.
they'll follow the creek beds, and they all lead to these holes in the ground and stuff like that. It's pretty creepy, because these people, they just randomly happened upon them in this area, and they all, that's how they live. They deal with this, I guess, and that's how they grow up. It's part of their culture. That part's really wild to me. So like, to me, I've always thought when you talk about missing 411, like, here's this aspect of it that this group of people in the United States is across multiple states grow up learning about disappearances in the woods and these cave systems, or these mythical creatures essentially taking people. Again, it doesn't have to just be interdimensional Bigfoot. It could be Sableye, a whole group of them
Hmm.
out there snatching bodies, dude, taking them down into the cave system. And what a perfect way to hide somebody, and you'll never see him again. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
but yeah, that one to me, like, I feel like there's some sort of tie there, whether it's loose, and that's again why I say that there's not just one explanation. I do think the interdimensional piece has a heavy hand in it, whether
Hmm.
UFOs, UAPs, aliens, whatever you want to call them, have the ability and know how to travel interdimensionally, and that's how they get between point A and point B so fast, or whatever, Bigfoot, goblins, whatever you want to call them. And this is just fun conversations to have, and there is an element for me of seriousness in this, because I do ascribe to some of this stuff, because I don't think we know everything about our own planet or the universe at all, right?
Oh,
Look at how
yeah.
little we know about the ocean, okay?
Hmm.
But I mean, it just, to me, like, I've always had like a tie to it in my brain about 411, missing 411, and like the Kelly Hopkinsville incident and all of the things surrounding it.
What was the name of that documentary thing you're talking about?
Hellier, Hellier.
Hellier.
Yeah. Yeah, and I recommend recommend it to everybody. Like I said, it's a slow burn. It's not like this fast paced documentary with a ton of drama to get you sucked in. There are incidents that happen interspersed with a bunch of other stuff. You have to have an interest in this kind of thing. If like this is your first time hearing about it and you really don't have an interest in this stuff and you try to go watch it, my assumption is you probably will turn it off. But it's really good to me if you have an interest in this kind of stuff. So
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna look into it. I'm
I
also gonna
watched it
watch
on
that movie
YouTube.
Fire in the Sky.
Yeah, dude, Fire in the Sky is a scary book, man, or scary movie. I
Yeah, I'm gonna
mean,
watch that too.
Travis Walton is still alive. He actually was on the Joe Rogan podcast. You can look up his interview with Joe Rogan and listen to him tell you about this, and it's pretty terrifying. And you could tell it makes him very uncomfortable, and he
Hmm.
doesn't do a lot of public appearances. So,
Yeah, because he probably like it was all real to him,
well, yeah, and
and it
he'll
all
tell
happened
you,
to him.
right,
Yeah,
it changed his life and made his life worse, and he will tell you that.
that's crazy.
That sucks.
Yeah. Well, speaking about people losing track of time, stuff like that, I think it's a good time to kind of end this before we fall into an interdimensional rift. Um,
Yeah.
this
No, I
is
mean
very,
this.
very interesting. I love learning about kind of weird and off-topic things, and I wish more people would have an interest in them because they are very strange. And to all listening, look up the stuff we talked about. You could look up the exact names and read about the stories yourself.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, just
listen to Hiding Something. Like that's a great podcast too to kind of go
hiding
into this.
something. Yep.
Yep. But yeah, no, I love this stuff. It was great to kind of
Yeah.
just pick your brain and kind of go more in depth because I learned a lot from you today, and I would hope that you learned something from me too.
Oh, for sure. And when we start, prior to posting this episode, of course, like you're listening to it after it gets posted, there will be a lot of stuff we'll put up on our Instagram and Facebook. And like I said, we have a TikTok now too, so there'll be stuff there, and YouTube Shorts and stuff. About this stuff, I'm definitely going to put that map up with the cave system and where people have gone missing. I'll put
Yep.
Sableye up. I'll put some Kelly
Who's that
Hopkins.
Pokemon?
Right. Some Kelly Hopkinsville stuff on there, which again, I really recommend people going and looking into, because that is a wild story. And it made the news. There's newspaper articles about it back in the day. But like you said, I love talking about this stuff. These are the conversations that really get me going. Um, and I do. There's 100% an element of truth in here. Where it's at, I don't know. Right? We're talking about this because I don't understand everything about our existence on this planet in the universe. No one does. I'll just say flat out. If you think you know everything about it, then that's pretty naive. And
Hmm.
that's I don't agree if you think you know everything. But
For sure.
I love these sorts of conversations because it just gets your mind going about things out there that we don't really realize and or don't know anything about or know enough about, and that could exist right alongside with us. And it's just, to me, there's room for all of it. If we exist, you know, who's to say the other stuff doesn't exist too? So, but yeah, Red Clover Coffee, our sponsor, Sheep's Clothing LLC. Please go check them out. Like I said, it really helps us out. Use our code Came with Fire at Red Clover Coffee. We will let you know when our discount code for apparel with Sheep's Clothing is out there. We'll put it on our Instagram
Hmm.
and Facebook and our other stuff. And as always, please, if you're listening to this and you haven't already subscribed or liked or left us a comment or a review, please do that. The reviews really make a difference. If you go out there and you leave us a good review, they go a long way. It helps us with our visibility.
Yeah.
Um, don't
Share
just
us too.
stop. Share us, yeah. Tell a friend about us. Don't just stop with finding us on Instagram and then listening to us on Spotify. Please go find our YouTube. Just give it a like and a subscribe. Turn the notifications on so you know when we're on there. Anything you guys can do, please do. And that stuff means the most to us, and supporting us that way by going on there and subscribing. And you can find our link tree and our bio and all that stuff. So Missing 411, definitely one of the most interesting things out there. We barely even scratched the surface. There's a ton of other stuff.
Barely.
Yeah, barely. Didn't even scratch it probably. Maybe we'll do another episode on this. Who knows? There's a ton of other stuff out there. And if you do happen to listen to this and you find something really interesting about it you want to talk about with us, share it. Maybe we'll talk about it on another episode. Please let us know. And
Yeah,
always let
send
us
us a
know what you want to
message.
hear. Absolutely. Let
Yep.
us know what you want to hear. But all right, man. Good talking to you. This episode, very interesting to me. And yeah, I'm out, man.